Welcome to my special episode about my Vega Sport tiny speedboat, where today I'm gonna show you how we mounted this outboard motor to it. Let's start at the very beginning after I just received the boat. And I want to point out that I'm a total newbie to this topic when it comes to working with small glass fiber boats powered by an outboard motor. And so this video is not a how-to or tutorial kind of video. If anything, it's a how not to video, but you can judge that for yourself. Right, so here's our outboard motor. Here's our remote throttle control and gear selector box. And with this so-called conversion kit, we're gonna put the two together. Step 1 is to detach the side covers. Step 2 is to remove the throttle cables from the cable holder, which is located right next to your flux capacitor. Then we remove the cable holder because it's going to be replaced by a different part. Next we have to remove this little front cover here. Maybe let's remove the tiller first. Here I'm removing the clutch lever shaft, because next we are building a new throttle and clutch lever assembly. And this is maybe the part which is a bit more complicated, but then again, once you put it all together, it's not that difficult. The only thing that's really difficult is to not lose anything or drop it into the water, but maybe that's just me. Here's the finished throttle and clutch lever assembly, which we are now gonna attach to the throttle lever shaft. Now the clutch lever shaft can be put back in place. And the throttle lever and clutch lever assembly can be bolted onto the motor. Next we have to install the throttle rod, which allows us to operate the throttle control on the motor. Now that this is working, we have to replace this part by a cable holder, which allows us to attach the new throttle and gear selector cables. The steering adjuster needs to be removed next. So that we can then install the new steering bracket. Here are the new throttle and gear selector cables, which need to be fitted with the proper adapter before we can mount them to the engine. Next we have to do the same on the remote control box. And with that, it's time for a first little test. What you see here is actually the very first test I did. Everything is working more or less the way it should, but I ended up making some fine adjustments so that the whole process is much more smooth by now. Next, let's just add this little rubber piece here. Then we can put the housing back where it belongs. And with that, the conversion is finished. Now then, Let's position the boat for the most risky part of this build, which is to put the engine into the boat. For this, I put it as close as possible to the gap between the big boat and the platform so that we can drop in the engine from there. A friend came over to help me. I secured the engine with a rope, just in case. So here we go. Maybe I'll bring the big boat a little bit closer. One, two, three, and there we go. Getting the engine to work with the teleflex steering was a difficult process, which I didn't cover in detail, but I'm gonna show you the result in just a moment. Here I'm attaching the remote control box. I put in the gasoline tank and battery, which later on I stored behind the rear seat here. For now, let's do a quick test to see if the engine runs. And it does. For the time being, I'm using a simple little switch to shut off the engine. Right, now we come to the good part of this video, where we first have a look at what we got and then take it for a little test drive. And I want to remind you one more time that this is a work in progress, done by a complete amateur, that this is not a how-to video, yada yada yada, but that I'm simply showing you where I am at right now. Nevertheless, if you see anything that's bothering you, or that you think is not proper, by all means, please let me know in the comment section. I added some wood between the engine mount and the boat, but that's really just a temporary solution. On this end, everything seems fine to me. Steering to the left was never a problem. But in order to get it to steer all the way to the right, I had to cut an opening to allow the tiller arm to stretch all the way out. And with that, let's take her for a spin. As I said before, this is a work in progress. One of the biggest issues is that the trim of the motor, that's the angle at which it sits relative to the surface of the water, is off by about 10-15 degrees. Ideally, it should be exactly perpendicular to the water. Another big issue, other than this huge crack there, is that I need to bolt down the engine here in the back, otherwise it will do this when going into reverse. But hey, that's material for another video. For now, let me show you how I park this thing. And so that's the latest on my Vega Sport tiny speedboat. I hope you enjoyed the episode and that I see you again in the next video.